The night in the capital system of the Empire was calm. Stars burned brightly over the great fleets that circled the throne world. Every ship was a symbol of power. Huge destroyers, heavy cruisers, carriers that held wings of fighters. The Empire had ruled the galaxy for centuries, and they believed no one could ever challenge them. To the rulers, the fleet was not just protection. It was a warning to the rest of the galaxy. Do not rise. Do not resist. The Empire will crush you. But that night, something different appeared. It was small, almost invisible against the backdrop of stars. At first the scanners did not even pick it up. The crew thought it was an asteroid or space debris. But then the strange vessel moved. Steady, direct, purposeful. An ensign looked at the readings twice, then a third time. "No. This can't be right," he whispered. The signal was not in the database, not in the charts, not in any known records. This was not a freighter, not a pirate craft, not a design that had ever been seen before. The duty officer frowned. "Send." "A message. Demand identification," he ordered, across the void of space. Signals were transmitted, warning the unknown ship to halt. No response came. The ship kept moving forward, silent, as if the Empire's authority meant nothing. The officer repeated the command, his voice louder now, still silence. Some of the crew laughed nervously, thinking it was maybe a broken probe or an old relic from forgotten wars, but others felt something colder. The air inside the control room seemed heavy, as if danger itself had entered with that single signal. The fleet moved quickly, dozens of destroyers breaking formation to surround the intruder. Massive cannons targeted the tiny craft. Fighters launched in swarms, their engines lighting the black sky. A storm of metal and fire prepared to fall on the silent vessel. Yet still, it did not move. It did not answer. It simply floated forward, like a shadow that ignored all light. On the throne world below, reports rushed into the high command. Generals sat in their chambers, confident, arrogant. "It is nothing." One sneered. "A wandering wreck. Then why does it move with such precision?" Another asked. No answer came, only silence, and outside, in the emptiness of the system, the strange ship slowed. For the first time it stopped. Hanging between stars and warships, its hull gleamed faintly, as though something alive pulsed. Beneath the metal, the scanners tried to read it, but every attempt failed. The data was broken, unreadable, like the ship itself refused to be measured. Fear began to crawl inside the hearts of even the bravest commanders, because no one knew what that ship was, and what cannot be known is what cannot be controlled. The fleet commander, an old war veteran, stood tall on the bridge of his flagship. "Fire warning shots," he said, his voice sharp. "Let this intruder understand whose space they enter." A moment later, cannons roared. Beams of energy sliced across the void. Bright explosions flared around the unknown ship, but none touched it. The vessel had not even moved, and yet, somehow, the weapons missed. The officers looked in disbelief, their faces pale. "How?" "Our aim is perfect," one stammered. Inside the throne palace, whispers grew louder. Could it be a forgotten weapon from the ancient wars? Could it be a rebellion testing secret technology? Or worse, could it belong to the one enemy the Empire had laughed at for generations? The humans, that word had always been spoken as a joke, a minor race from a minor world. But legends had whispered that humans never showed their true power. Legends no one wanted to believe. The ship continued to float, silent, patient, as though waiting. Every eye in the system turned toward it. Every screen on every world carried its image. A small, quiet thing that defied the might of an empire. Children watched from safe rooms. Parents clutched their hands. Soldiers swallowed hard behind steel walls. Even the emperor leaned forward on his throne, his golden crown heavy on his head. His eyes narrowed. "What are you?" He whispered into the empty chamber. "What do you want?" But the ship did not answer. It only waited. And that silence was more terrifying than any threat. The fleet commander raised his hand once more. "All ships, prepare for attack. he ordered, every cannon charged, every missile armed. The sky around the vessel burned with the heat of energy weapons. Tension filled the air like a storm waiting to break. No one breathed, no one spoke, because deep down, they all felt the same fear. This was not just a ship, this was something else, something that did not belong to the world they knew, and tonight, they would discover its truth. But already, whispers had begun across the galaxy. Whispers that would grow into legend. No one knew what that ship was. Only that its arrival marked the beginning of the end. The fleet of the Empire stood ready, hundreds of warships in tight formation, their weapons glowing like stars of fire. The unknown vessel remained silent, floating alone in the darkness. To the untrained eye it looked fragile, smaller than even a patrol corvette. But the veterans of the fleet could feel it, an invisible weight pressing on their chests. Something was wrong, something far beyond their understanding. The fleet commander gave the order. All ships, open fire, his voice thundered across the channels. A moment later, the void exploded with light. Cannons unleashed beams of energy, railguns spat storms of metal. Missiles streaked through space like firebirds. The sky became a burning ocean of destruction. The power of an empire, enough to erase whole planets, had been aimed at one single ship. The officers on the flagship leaned forward, waiting to see the intruder vanish. But when the light faded, their faces turned pale. The ship was still there. Not a scratch on its hull, not a flicker of damage. It had not even moved. It had simply endured the storm and emerged untouched. Silence filled the command bridge. What is this thing? Someone whispered, his voice trembling. Then the ship responded, not with words, not with threats, but with light. From its hull, faint lines began to glow, symbols unknown to the Empire, like ancient runes pulsing with power. In a heartbeat, beams of pure energy shot out. One beam, one ship destroyed, another beam. Another cruiser ripped apart like paper. Explosions lit up the void, each one a death cry of thousands of soldiers. Within seconds, an entire wing of destroyers was gone. The crew stared in shock. They had seen battles, wars, uprisings, but never had they seen destruction arrive so fast, so absolute. Panic spread across the fleet. Captains shouted orders, fighters screamed warnings, scatter, flank it, overwhelm it. But no tactic mattered. Every time the strange vessel fired, another ship vanished into flame. Missiles never touched it. Lasers bent away as though the air itself refused to harm it. It was as if the universe itself was protecting the intruder. The fleet commander gritted his teeth. Regroup, form a wall. We cannot retreat. We are the Empire. But even as he spoke, another explosion tore through the line. His flagship shook under the shockwave, alarms blaring from the throne world. The Emperor and his court watched in disbelief. The great fleet of the Empire, symbols of their eternal rule, was being erased in minutes. Advisors gasped. Some covered their faces. This cannot be real. It must be a trick, one said, his voice breaking. But the Emperor's eyes were fixed on the image, cold and silent. He could see the truth. This was no trick. This was power, pure and unrelenting. And it was not theirs. On the bridge of the human ship, a lone pilot sat in silence. His hands rested calmly on controls that glowed with strange blue light. He did not smile. He did not rage. He was simply focused. He whispered to himself, words no one else could hear. They thought Earth was weak. They thought we were nothing. His eyes glimmered as another fleet carrier exploded on his screen. They will remember tonight. They will remember. Humans, back in the battle, the Empire's fighters made one desperate charge. Hundreds of small ships dove toward the intruder, filling the sky with streaks of light. The unknown vessel did not move. Instead, a pulse rippled from its core. Invisible at first, then spreading like a wave of pure force. Every fighter it touched went silent. Engines dead, weapons cold. In an instant, the swarm of fighters became a field of drifting wrecks. Some pilots screamed as their ships went dark. Others wept, but none could fight, none could resist. Fleet commander slammed his fist against the console. We cannot win this. But even in his rage, he knew retreat was impossible. The Emperor was watching. The galaxy was watching. And if the Empire turned and ran, their fear would echo louder than any defeat. So they fought on, desperate, hopeless, and the intruder answered each attack with calm, precise destruction, one by one. The might of the Empire fell silent when the smoke cleared. Only fragments of the Grand Armada floated in space. The once proud fleet was reduced to burning wreckage and drifting bodies. The commander's flagship was crippled, fires tearing through its decks. He stood broken on his bridge. The light of his empire's ruin reflected in his eyes. No ship can do this, he whispered. No power should exist like this. But across the galaxy, the message had already spread. Whispers carried on secret channels, rumors shouted. In crowded markets, no one knew what that ship was, but it destroyed an entire fleet in minutes. Some said it was a weapon from forgotten gods. Some said it was vengeance born of the dead, and some, the oldest rumors of all, claimed it was human. The word human spread like fire, and for the first time in centuries, the Empire felt fear. The strange ship turned slowly, its hull still glowing faintly. It did not chase the survivors, it did not speak, it simply drifted onward, as though the destruction it left behind was nothing. The path ahead was clear, the capital world itself. The Emperor rose from his throne, his voice shaking with anger and unease. Summon the rest of the fleet, he ordered. Summon every ship, every soldier, every weapon we have. His voice grew louder, echoing through the halls. This intruder will not end the Empire. But deep inside, even he knew the truth. The first strike had already changed everything. The Empire was no longer eternal, it was living on borrowed time. Panic in the Empire, approximately 800 words. The destruction of the fleet sent shockwaves through the Empire. On the capital world, the skies were filled with burning wreckage as fragments of ships fell through the atmosphere. Citizens stood in silence, staring at the fiery trails above, unable to believe that their mighty armada had been shattered in minutes. For centuries, the Empire had promised safety and power, claiming their fleets were invincible. Now with one unknown ship, that illusion was broken. Fear spread faster than fire in the crowded markets. Whispers turned into screams. Mothers clutched their children. Fathers argued in panic. Merchants closed their stalls, fearing looters would come once order failed. People shouted questions at soldiers marching through the streets, but the soldiers had no answers. Even the lowest worker on the farthest colony world heard the rumors within hours. No one knew what that ship was, they said, but it ended a fleet in minutes. Some called it a ghost, some called it a god, others swore it was human. That last word made many tremble, for humans had always been dismissed, yet feared in old legends. Inside the halls of the imperial palace, chaos reigned. Advisors argued. Generals shouted. Ministers begged for calm. The people must not know the truth. One cried, "We must hide what happened. How can we hide this?" Another snapped, pointing to the sky where burning wreckage still rained down. The Emperor sat on his throne, silent, his face like stone. For the first time in decades, he felt something he had not known. Doubt he had watched with his own eyes as the fleet was destroyed like children's toys. He had heard the cries of dying captains before the signal cut out, and deep in his chest, he felt the heavy weight of fear. But fear was poison, and an emperor could never show weakness. He rose from his throne, his voice loud and steady. "Summon the rest of the fleets," he commanded. "Send word to every governor, every system, every stronghold. The Empire will not bow to one ship." His words echoed through the chamber, giving false courage to those who heard them. But when they left the hall, their whispers betrayed the truth. No one believed the Empire was untouchable anymore. In military barracks, soldiers sharpened their blades and checked their rifles, but their eyes carried unease. Veterans of 100 battles muttered in low voices, "What weapon can erase 1,000 ships in seconds? What if our guns cannot even scratch it?" The younger soldiers tried to act brave, but in their hearts they wondered if they were being sent to die. Fear spread through the ranks like a disease, and once fear infects an army, it is hard to cure. Meanwhile, in the dark corners of the galaxy, enemies of the Empire began to stir. Rebel leaders smiled for the first time in years. "Did you hear?" They whispered. "The Empire bleeds." Old warlords who had long been silent began to gather their forces. Even neutral worlds that once bowed in silence now whispered of freedom. For if one ship could break the Empire's fleets, then maybe, just maybe, the galaxy could rise again, back in the capital. The Emperor met with his council behind locked doors. Maps and holograms filled the table. "We must find out what it is," a scientist said, his voice trembling. "Is it a machine? From the ancient wars? A hidden project from a forgotten race?" "No," another whispered. "It is human." That word silenced the room. The Empire had always mocked humans, calling them primitive, fragile, weak, but hidden in old records were warnings, reports. Buried for centuries. "Do not provoke them," one ancient admiral had written. "They do not fight like others. They do not stop. They do not surrender." The Emperor slammed his fist against the table. "Then we will erase them before they rise," he declared. His eyes burned with fury. But behind that fire was something colder. Fear. "Mobilize the home fleet. Call back the distant armadas. We will crush this intruder." Yet deep inside he wondered if such a thing was even possible. If one ship could erase a fleet, what would happen when more arrived? On the streets, panic only grew. Markets burned as riots erupted. People demanded answers, demanded safety. Soldiers tried to control the crowds. But fear made the people bold. "Where are your fleets now?" They shouted. "What good is the Empire if one ship destroys it?" The sound of rebellion, once unthinkable, now echoed in the heart of the capital, and still, the unknown vessel drifted closer. It did not rush, it did not chase. It moved like a shadow across the stars. Calm and steady, every hour, more worlds saw its image. Every hour, more fear spread. Children asked their mothers if the ship would come for them. Priests called it the hand of judgment. Scholars whispered of humans, their voices shaking. The galaxy was changing. The illusion of eternal rule had been shattered, and all of it because of one ship, one silent, merciless ship that had not spoken a single word. Panic became the Empire's new enemy, and no fleet, no throne, no crown could stop it. As night fell over the capital world, the Emperor looked out from his balcony. He saw the smoke of riots, the glow of burning markets, the fear in the eyes of his own guards. He whispered to himself, so quiet no one else could hear, "If one ship can do this, what will happen if there are more?" The unknown ship moved deeper into the Empire's heart. It left behind wreckage and silence, yet still it did not speak. For the people of the Empire, its silence was more terrifying than any declaration of war. Every hour, more ships tried to intercept it, and every hour those ships were reduced to ashes. No one could explain how such a small vessel carried such unstoppable power. Some said it was a ghost ship, others swore it was a god's punishment. But the truth was stranger, and far more dangerous. Inside the vessel, the truth waited in quiet shadows. The ship was not a mindless machine, nor an ancient weapon. It was human. A single man sat in the pilot's chair, his hands resting calmly on glowing controls. His face was tired but steady, his eyes sharp with determination. Screens surrounded him, showing burning fleets, broken worlds, and the trembling Empire. He did not smile, he did not celebrate. He only whispered to himself. They thought Earth was weak. They thought we would stay silent. The ship itself was unlike anything the Empire had ever seen. It was forged from designs no alien mind could understand. Its hull absorbed attacks as if the universe itself bent to protect it. Its weapons were simple, precise, and merciless. Every strike was clean, every destruction deliberate. This was no accident, no fluke. This was the result of human hands, human minds, human will. back in the palace, scientists and generals argued over the ship's origin. We cannot identify its alloys. One said, sweat dripping down his brow, our scanners fail to read it, as though it is hidden from the laws of physics. Then it must not be real, a general growled, though his shaking voice betrayed him. But one scholar, old and forgotten, whispered what the others feared to admit. It is human. The council fell silent. That single word echoed in the chamber like thunder. The emperor narrowed his eyes. Impossible. Humans are primitives. They have no fleets, no empire. But deep in his mind, he remembered the old warnings. Warnings buried by his ancestors because they were too inconvenient. Never provoke them, the records had said. Do not test their resolve, for they are unlike others. While the empire panicked, the lone human pilot guided his ship closer to the capital. He remembered Earth, a blue world far from this throne. He remembered the laughter of alien diplomats who called humanity fragile. He remembered the raids, the burned colonies, the arrogance of the empire, and now he remembered why he was here. Not for conquest, not for wealth, but for survival. Earth will not bow, he whispered. Earth will not forget. The people of the capital looked up as the ship appeared in their sky. For the first time, they could see it with their own eyes. Not just through screens. It was smaller than they imagined, almost fragile. And yet, everyone who looked at it felt the same chill. Children pointed with wide eyes. Mothers pulled them close. Fathers whispered prayers. Some fell to their knees, calling it divine judgment. Others cursed it, screaming into the night. But all of them feared it. The emperor ordered every defense cannon on the planet to fire. Missiles streaked into the heavens. Cannons roared. The sky became a storm of fire and light. But when the smoke cleared, the ship was still there. Not a mark on its surface, not a single wound. It hovered above the capital like a predator staring down its prey. And then, for the first time, it spoke. A voice echoed across the airwaves. Of the empire, calm, steady, unmistakably human. You burned our worlds. You took our people. You laughed at our weakness. The words rolled across every city, every street, every home. They told you humanity was nothing. But tonight you see the truth. Soldiers froze at their posts. Citizens dropped what they held. Even the emperor clenched the arms of his throne, his knuckles white, because now the ghost ship had a face, and that face was human. On distant colonies, slaves of the empire wept with joy. They live, they cried. The humans live to the oppressed. Humanity had always been a rumor, a legend whispered in dark cells, and now the legend was real. One ship, one man, and the empire itself trembled. The human pilot continued, his voice steady. This is not conquest. This is not empire. This is justice. And with those words, his ship fired again, one beam of light, and the largest defense tower on the capital world crumbled into ash. The ground shook, the skies burned, the people screamed. The message was clear. This was not a negotiation. This was a warning. The emperor stood, his voice loud and angry. You dare threaten the empire? You dare show your face here? But no reply came, only silence. The ship hovered, patient, calm, and in that silence, the emperor felt the weight of his own mortality. Because now he understood. This was not the end of one battle. This was the beginning of something far greater. If one human ship could destroy fleets and silence worlds, what would happen when more arrived? The galaxy held its breath. The truth was revealed. The intruder was human, and the age of the empire was ending. The emperor could no longer pretend the threat was small. The mysterious human ship had burned through every defense, destroyed every fleet sent against it, and humiliated the throne. Now, for the first time in centuries, the empire prepared for total war. The order went out across the stars. Every ship, every soldier, every weapon was to converge on the capital system. It was not just a battle anymore. It was survival. Across the galaxy, war drums echoed. Massive dreadnoughts rose from shipyards. Carriers released wings of fighters. Ancient war machines were awakened from deep storage. Entire armadas began to move, their engines glowing like burning suns. The Emperor called it the last stand. "Let the galaxy see our strength," he declared, his voice broadcast to billions. No single ship, no single race can challenge the Empire. But behind his words, fear lingered, because he knew the truth. The Empire was gathering everything, not out of confidence, but out of desperation, in the streets of the capital. The people trembled as thousands of ships filled the skies. The air roared with the thunder of engines. The ground shook beneath their power. Citizens hoped that this would finally end the terror. They cheered, but their cheers were weak, hollow. For they had seen the unknown vessel with their own eyes, and they knew how easily it had erased fleets before. Above the throne world, the last stand began. The human ship arrived, silent as always, small against the ocean of warships waiting. For it, an entire armada stretched across the system. Thousands of destroyers, cruisers, and dreadnoughts formed a blockade so thick that no light could pierce through. Every weapon was locked on one target, that single vessel, the fleet commander's. Voice shook as he gave the order. "All ships, fire!" The void turned into fire. The combined power of the greatest fleet in history erupted at once. The sky lit brighter than 1,000 suns. Energy beams crisscrossed space. Missiles rained like meteors. For a moment, the entire system seemed to burn. The people below cheered, believing the intruder must be destroyed at last. But when the light faded, hope turned to horror. The ship was still there, not only unharmed, but calm, steady, unshaken. Its hull shimmered faintly as though reality itself bent to protect it. Then it struck back. A single beam fired, and 10 cruisers vanished in one explosion, another pulse of energy. And dreadnoughts that had stood for centuries crumbled into fragments. It moved through the fleet like a shadow, striking without mercy. Every attack from the Empire was useless. Every shield, every cannon, every fighter fell before it. The commander screamed into the comms, "Surround it. Cut it off. Sacrifice if you must." Ships dove forward in desperate charges. Some rammed the intruder, their hulls shattering against its defenses. Others released swarms of fighters in suicidal waves. But nothing worked. Each sacrifice only became another burst of flame in the endless darkness. The Emperor watched from his palace, his face pale, his hands shaking, though he hid them beneath his robe. He saw his empire, his pride, his legacy, reduced to fire and ash. One by one, the stars of his fleet went dark. One by one, his generals reported failure, until there were none left. The people screamed in terror as fragments of burning ships fell through their skies. The ground quaked as defense towers crumbled. The oceans boiled with falling debris. Priests prayed, children cried, soldiers ran, for the Empire's last stand had become its greatest humiliation. All its strength, all its weapons, all its numbers had meant nothing against one human ship. Inside the mysterious vessel, the pilot sat in silence, his eyes steady, his breathing calm. He remembered the burned colonies, the dead of Earth, the arrogance of the Empire, and he knew this moment was justice. He whispered to himself. He thought humans were weak. He pressed his hand to the glowing console. "Now you see what one human can do." On the palace balcony, the Emperor roared in rage. "This is not the end. The Empire will never fall." But even as he spoke, he heard the silence of dead fleets. He saw the fear in the eyes of his guards, and he knew his words were lies. The Empire's last stand had failed. It was not strength that the galaxy would remember. It was weakness. Ship hovered over the burning world, its presence like a shadow of doom. It did not speak. It did not move. It simply remained, letting the silence speak louder than any words. Across the galaxy, the message was clear. The Empire was not eternal. It could be broken. It had been broken, and all it had taken was one ship, one human ship. As the fires of the capital burned, Survivors whispered the truth. No fleet had saved them. No army had defended them. Their emperor's last stand was nothing but ashes. The legend grew louder, carried on every desperate voice. No one knew what that ship was, but it ended the Empire's fleet in minutes. And the people trembled, for they wondered, if one human could do this alone, what would happen when the rest of humanity arrived? The palace trembled as the echoes of battle reached the throne world. From the great windows of the imperial hall, the emperor could see the burning skies once. Those skies had been filled with the proud banners of his fleets, but now they were filled with falling fire. Every explosion above was another ship gone. Another piece of the empire's pride turned into dust. The last stand had failed, and the emperor knew it, but still, he refused to accept defeat. Guards rushed through the halls, their boots striking the marble floors in panic. Advisors shouted over each other, begging for escape ships, begging for surrender, begging for mercy. The emperor silenced them with a glare, his golden crown heavy on his brow. "The empire does not surrender," he hissed, his voice shaking though he tried to sound strong. "We are eternal. We are power itself. One ship cannot end us." But even as he spoke, a shadow fell across the city. The mysterious vessel hovered above the capital, silent and steady, watching. Its presence weighed on the people like a storm. Every citizen who looked up felt the same fear. The empire was collapsing, and no crown, no fleet, no ruler could stop it. The streets below turned into chaos. Riots broke out as desperate people looted for food and shelter. Mothers clutched their children. Soldiers tried to keep order. Priests shouted prayers into the burning air. But nothing could silence the panic. They had believed in the empire for centuries, and now their faith was broken in a single night. Some cursed the emperor, calling him a liar who had promised safety. Others begged the strange ship for mercy, falling to their knees and crying into the smoke-filled sky. Inside the palace, the emperor's council fell apart. One minister shouted, "We must negotiate. We must beg for peace." Another screamed, "Kill him now, whoever he is, before he reaches us." A general banged his fist against the table. "We have no weapons left, no fleets left, nothing." The room dissolved into madness, and in the center of it all, the emperor sat on his throne, silent, his hands trembling. He had ruled for so long, commanded fear and respect. But now, for the first time, he felt small. He looked at the shattered holograms of his fleets, at the dead stars of his empire, and he whispered to himself, "This cannot be real." Above, the human ship began to descend. It moved slowly, calmly, as though time itself bent for it. The defense towers on the planet's surface fired desperately. Beams of light and waves of missiles streaked into the sky, but every shot vanished against the intruder's hull. The crowd watched in silence as their greatest defenses crumbled one by one. The capital shook with the sound of towers falling. With the roar of explosions, the palace windows cracked as the city below burned. Every strike from the ship was precise, controlled. It was not wild destruction, it was judgment. The emperor's guards begged him to flee. "Your Majesty, please, there is still time. We can take you to the hidden vaults, to the outer colonies." But he shook his head, his pride refusing to bend. "If I run, I am no emperor," he muttered. But deep in his eyes, fear betrayed him. The truth was clear. There was nowhere left to run. On the palace balcony, he stepped out into the choking smoke. He looked up at the black shape in the sky. His people screamed around him. Fires rose from every street, yet he stood tall, raising his fist at the heavens. "You dare!" he roared, his voice breaking. "You dare bring my empire to ruin? Who are you to challenge me?" The ship answered with silence. That silence was heavier than thunder, and in it, the emperor felt his throne crumble beneath him. Inside the vessel, the human pilot watched the capital city. He saw the golden towers, the palaces built on the backs of slaves, the streets filled with suffering. He remembered Earth's pain, the voices of his people crying as the Empire burned their worlds. And he spoke softly, "You ruled with fear, you ruled with chains. Now you will know fear yourself." His hand hovered over the glowing console. One command could end the palace. One command could erase the Emperor from history. But he hesitated, for he knew this act was more than victory. It was a message to the galaxy. Humanity had risen, and no empire could hold them down. In the throne hall, the Emperor sank into his chair. The crown slipped from his head and rolled across the floor. He stared at it with hollow eyes, the symbol of power, now nothing but metal. His empire was gone, his fleets destroyed, his people broken. All that remained was the shadow in the sky, and the knowledge that one human had done what no army, no rebellion, no god had ever done. He closed his eyes. For the first time in his life, he felt powerless. The palace shook as the human ship unleashed a final strike. The ground split, walls cracked, towers crumbled. The people screamed. The capital burned. The Emperor's throne room collapsed in dust and fire. And in that moment, the Empire itself collapsed. The crown, the throne, the name. All of it turned to ash when the smoke cleared. The ship hovered above the ruins. It did not gloat. It did not celebrate. It simply drifted in silence, as though its task was complete. The galaxy would never forget that night. The collapse of the throne, the end of the Empire, and the beginning of a new legend, the legend of humanity. The palace lay in ruins. The golden towers of the capital were nothing but broken stone and burning ash. The throne that had once ruled the galaxy was gone, buried under smoke and dust, and above it all, the strange ship hovered in silence, watching the world it had brought to its knees. No fleets remained, no defenses stood, no armies answered the Emperor's call. The Empire was finished. The people emerged from the ruins, their faces covered in ash, their voices trembling. They looked up at the black shadow in the sky and whispered among themselves, "Is it over? Will it leave us now?" Some dropped to their knees and prayed, others cursed it in fear, but all of them knew the truth. The empire that had claimed to be eternal had fallen in a single night. On distant worlds, news spread faster than fire. Slaves in the mines raised their heads as the word reached them. The emperor is dead, the throne is gone, the fleets destroyed. They wept, not in fear, but in joy, for the chains of the empire no longer held them. Rebel leaders lit fires of celebration. Long-hidden banners of freedom unfurled across the stars. Merchants who had been crushed by taxes laughed. Pirates who had been hunted cheered. Everywhere, the galaxy whispered the same legend. No one knew what that ship was, but it ended. The Empire in minutes. Inside the vessel, the human pilot sat in silence. His mission was complete, yet his heart was heavy. He had seen too much destruction, too much death. This victory was not glory. It was necessity. He thought of Earth, far away and quiet. He thought of the families who had been lost to the Empire's cruelty. And he whispered softly, "This is for them." The ship did not fire again. It did not destroy what was left of the world. Instead, it hovered for a long moment. Then, slowly it turned. Its engines glowed faintly as it drifted back into the stars. No farewell, no explanation, no promise, only silence. And that silence was more terrifying than thunder, because no one knew where it was going or when it might return. The Emperor's crown was found days later in the rubble. Broken, bent, stripped of jewels. Children played with it in the ruins, not knowing what it once meant. To them, it was nothing more than metal. To their parents, it was proof. Proof that no ruler, no empire, no throne could last forever. Legend of the Empire was over, and the legend of humanity had begun. The galaxy waited in fear. If one human ship could destroy the mightiest empire in minutes, what would happen if there were more? Were there fleets hidden beyond the stars? Was Earth preparing for conquest? Or had this been a warning, a message to leave humanity alone? No one knew, and that uncertainty haunted every world, In the markets of free colonies, storytellers began to sing the tale. They spoke of the night when the sky burned, of the silent ship that destroyed 1,000 war machines. They spoke of the emperor's fall, of the people's cries, of the throne collapsing into ash, and they spoke of the pilot, the lone human who said nothing but showed everything. Some called him a savior, some called him a demon, but all agreed on one thing: he had changed the galaxy forever. On Earth, far away from the chaos, life continued quietly. Children played under blue skies. Families rebuilt what had been lost. But in secret halls, leaders whispered of the mission's success. They knew the galaxy now feared them, and for the first time, humanity was not a target. They were a force, a people who had been underestimated, forgotten, mocked, but never again. The throne world slowly rebuilt itself, but it was no longer a world of power. It was a scar, a reminder of the night when one ship ended centuries of rule. The people who survived told the story again and again. Each time it grew larger, each time it carried more fear. No one knew what that ship was, they said, but it ended the empire in minutes. The ruins of the palace became a place of pilgrimage. People from across the galaxy came to see the fallen throne. They stood in silence, imagining the shadow that had hovered above it. They touched the broken crown, whispered the old emperor's name, and then they turned their eyes to the stars, wondering if the ship was still out there, waiting, because legends do not fade, they grow. And the legend of the human ship became the most powerful of all. Parents told their children to behave, or the human would come. Generals warned their armies never to provoke Earth, and rulers trembled in their palaces, for they all knew one truth: if one human could end an empire, then no empire was safe. The galaxy had entered a new age, not of crowns, not of thrones, not of eternal empires, but of fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of humanity, fear of the silence after the storm.